A routine day turns dark. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and the sun cast a golden glow over Grantville. The small town was bustling as usual, with families out shopping and enjoying the weekend. In the busy parking lot just outside Tully's grocery, Alana Foster and her 12-year-old daughter, Maya, were finishing up their errands. Alana, a kind-hearted woman in her early 30s with a quiet strength, had moved to Grantville a few years ago and had quickly become known for her warm smile and her dedication to raising Maya with strong values of respect and resilience. Alana had faced her fair share of challenges over the years as a single mother, but she never let anything stand in her way. Her calm demeanor and unwavering patience had always helped her navigate difficult situations, especially when it came to shielding Maya from any harm. Today they were in good spirits, chatting about their plans for the weekend as they loaded the groceries into the trunk of their car. Suddenly, a police car rolled up beside them, its engine idling as if waiting for something. Alana didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was a routine patrol. But then the door opened, and a middle-aged officer, Hank Parker, stepped out, his face a mask of disdain. He was known around town, but not in a positive light. Officer Parker had a reputation for picking on people who didn't look like him, particularly those who were black or from marginalized communities. Many residents had come to fear him, but his actions had rarely been questioned by his superiors. "Ma'am," he barked, his voice carrying an edge that immediately put Alana on alert. "What are you doing here?" Alana blinked, momentarily taken aback. She glanced down at the grocery bags in her hands, and then back at Officer Parker. "Just shopping," she replied, keeping her tone polite yet wary. "We're heading home now." But Officer Parker wasn't interested in her explanation. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized her. "I need to see your ID," he demanded, his voice laced with suspicion. "You're looking suspicious." Alana's heart began to race, and she could feel Maya's small hand tighten around her arm. She kept her composure, unwilling to show any sign of fear. "I'm not doing anything wrong, officer. We just bought groceries, and I'm here with my daughter." Her response seemed to agitate him further. His face flushed, and without warning, he reached out, grabbing her arm with a force that caught her off guard. "I said, show me your ID," he hissed, his grip tightening. Maya, witnessing her mother's distress, quickly pulled out her phone and began recording. Alana noticed the action from the corner of her eye, and though she hadn't wanted Maya to be part of this ugly encounter, she knew it was best to have everything documented. Her instincts told her that this situation was quickly spiraling out of control. A few people nearby had taken notice of the commotion and began to gather, their faces reflecting a mix of concern and curiosity. Some of them also pulled out their phones, recording the incident from a distance. Officer Parker, aware of the growing crowd, seemed unfazed. If anything, the attention only made him more aggressive. "Stop resisting," he barked, even though Alana hadn't made a single move to resist. She kept her body still, her face calm, but inside, anger was beginning to simmer. She was a law-abiding citizen, and she had done nothing to warrant this treatment. "Please let go of my arm," Alana said firmly, her voice steady. "I am not resisting. You have no reason to treat me this way." Officer Parker's sneer deepened. "You think you're tough. You people never know when to keep quiet," he spat, his words laced with a venom that cut deep. The insult struck a nerve, and Alana felt a shift within her. She had spent years quietly enduring the subtle, everyday prejudices of the world, but this was different. She wasn't going to allow herself to be humiliated in front of her daughter, to be degraded in a way that made Maya feel unsafe in her own skin. Alana was no stranger to standing up for herself, and what Officer Parker didn't know was that she was a black belt in karate. She had trained for years, not just for physical strength, but to cultivate a sense of inner peace and self-respect. But today, all of her training, all of her patience was being tested. "Let go of me," she said again, each word a warning. But Officer Parker only tightened his grip, his gaze defiant. "You're going to regret talking back to me." Alana took a deep breath, her mind calming in the way it always did before a fight. She knew she had to make a decision, not only to protect herself, but to show Maya that she would not tolerate injustice, that she would stand up for her dignity no matter the cost. With a swift, practiced motion, Alana twisted her arm, breaking free from his grip in a way that left Officer Parker momentarily stunned. He stumbled back, clearly not expecting her to have the strength or the skill to defend herself. The crowd around them grew larger, phones held high as they recorded the scene unfolding before them. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a tension that electrified the atmosphere. Officer Parker's face twisted with anger and embarrassment. He was a man used to exerting control, to being feared, and Alana's defiance had wounded his pride. His expression darkened, and he lunged at her, assuming he could overpower her easily. But he didn't know who he was dealing with. Alana's training took over, her body moving instinctively as she sidestepped his clumsy attempt to grab her. She redirected his momentum with a gentle but firm push, causing him to stumble and catch himself just in time. His frustration was palpable, his breath coming in quick, angry huffs as he tried to regain control of the situation. "You're going to regret this," he spat, his face flushed with rage. Alana kept her stance calm, her voice steady. "I am only defending myself, officer. Please, stop this." But Officer Parker was beyond reason. With a sneer, he reached for his baton, raising it menacingly as the crowd gasped. Maya's heart pounded as she continued to record, her hands shaking, tears of fear welling in her eyes. Alana could feel her daughter's fear, and it fueled her resolve. She was not just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her daughter's right to feel safe, to know that her mother was capable of standing up against anyone who tried to strip away her dignity. As Officer Parker swung his baton, Alana moved swiftly, ducking and sweeping her leg in a controlled motion that knocked him off balance. He crashed to the ground, stunned, his pride bruised more than his body. He scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of pure fury, and swung again. But Alana blocked the strike with ease. Her movements were fluid, precise, every counter leaving him off balance and humiliated. The crowd was captivated, watching with bated breath as this single mother defended herself against a man who had clearly crossed the line. Some of them began cheering, their voices rising in support of Alana, encouraging her to stand her ground. Realizing he was outmatched, Officer Parker hesitated, his expression shifting from anger to fear. But it was too late. Alana had gained the upper hand, her calm and measured actions a testament to her strength and discipline. In one final move, she disarmed him, tossing his baton out of reach. He lay on the ground, panting and defeated, his face flushed with humiliation. The crowd was silent, stunned by the swift turn of events. Maya stopped recording, clutching her phone tightly, a mixture of awe and pride shining in her eyes. Alana stood over Officer Parker, breathing heavily but composed, her face calm, her spirit unbroken. "Are you done?" she asked him, her voice carrying strength without a trace of anger. Officer Parker didn't reply. He couldn't look her in the eye. By now, more police cars had arrived, and officers stepped out, looking from Officer Parker sprawled on the ground to Alana standing tall, her daughter by her side. One of the officers, Sergeant Brooks, approached cautiously, his gaze respectful. "Ma'am, can you explain what happened here?" he asked, his tone measured. Alana took a deep breath, steadying herself before recounting the events with clarity and calmness. The crowd murmured in agreement, and several people stepped forward to show their videos as proof of what they had witnessed. Maya handed her phone to Sergeant Brooks, who reviewed the footage with a grave expression. It was clear from the videos that Officer Parker had been the aggressor, and Alana had only acted in self-defense. Sergeant Brooks turned to Officer Parker, who was now sitting up, his face pale, a look of humiliation etched into his features. "Officer Parker, you're under investigation for misconduct," Sergeant Brooks stated firmly. The weight of his words was heavy, final, a turning point for everyone who had witnessed the event. As Officer Parker was escorted away, Alana looked down at Maya, who wrapped her arms around her mother in a tight hug, relief flooding her young face. The crowd slowly dispersed, but not before several people approached Alana to thank her, to tell her how much her courage had inspired them. In that moment, Alana realized that standing up for herself was not just about defending her own dignity. It was about setting an example for Maya and for everyone who had ever felt powerless. She hadn't sought to become a symbol of resilience, but fate had placed her in a moment that demanded strength, and she had answered the call. And this was just the beginning of a story that would forever change the community of Grantville. The ripples of courage. The encounter between Alana and Officer Parker quickly became the talk of Grantville. The videos taken by onlookers spread rapidly through social media, capturing not only the intense confrontation, but also the powerful display of courage by a woman who refused to back down in the face of injustice. The footage was raw, unfiltered, showing the precise moment Alana defended herself against the officer's aggression. People across the town, and soon the entire region, were captivated by her bravery. Alana and Maya, meanwhile, tried to settle back into their everyday lives. They returned home that Saturday afternoon, feeling both exhausted and empowered. Maya couldn't stop talking about it, her young mind processing what had just happened. She'd always known her mother was strong, but seeing her stand up to someone as intimidating as Officer Parker had shown her a new side of Alana. "Mom," Maya said that evening as they sat at the dinner table, "I didn't know you could do all that. You looked like a superhero." Alana chuckled, though her eyes softened with a mixture of pride and sadness. "I'm just your mom, Maya. But sometimes we have to stand up for what's right, even if it's hard or scary." Maya looked down at her plate, her expression thoughtful. "But what if something bad happens because you stood up to him? What if he comes after us?" Alana reached across the table, taking Maya's hand in hers. "You don't have to worry about that, sweetheart. People like Officer Parker think they can push others around just because they wear a badge. But today, he learned that no one has the right to treat people unfairly. And there were so many people recording and standing by us. We're not alone." Maya nodded, reassured, but Alana could sense the lingering fear in her daughter's eyes. Alana herself wasn't completely free from worry. She knew all too well how the system could protect people like Officer Parker, allowing them to continue their abuses unchecked. But she also knew that this moment, this act of resistance, could not be ignored. The next morning, Alana woke to a series of missed calls and text messages from friends, neighbors, and even people she hadn't spoken to in years. She quickly realized that her encounter with Officer Parker had gone viral. News outlets picked up the story, labeling her the mother who fought back. Local journalists were eager to speak with her, wanting to hear her side of the story directly. That Sunday afternoon, Alana received an unexpected visitor. Her neighbor, Miss Lorraine, an elderly woman with a fierce sense of justice and a reputation as the neighborhood watchdog, knocked on her door, a determined look in her eyes. Alana welcomed her in, pouring a cup of tea as Miss Lorraine settled into her living room. "Alana, I've lived in this town my whole life, and I've seen people like that officer get away with things that would make your blood boil," Miss Lorraine began, her voice shaking with emotion. "What you did yesterday, it was brave. And it was necessary. People need to know that we won't stand for this anymore." Alana nodded, listening intently. "I appreciate that, Miss Lorraine, but I didn't do it for attention. I just couldn't stand by and let him treat us like we were beneath him." Miss Lorraine placed her hand on Alana's. "That's why people respect you. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us. This town has needed someone to shine a light on these injustices for a long time. You've given us that courage." The two women spoke for hours, discussing not only the events of the previous day, but also the deeper issues of racism, power, and community. By the time Miss Lorraine left, she had convinced Alana that her fight was not just personal. It was part of a larger battle for respect and equality in their town. As the week progressed, Alana's story continued to spread, and her life became a whirlwind of attention. News crews appeared in Grantville, wanting to interview her. People began showing up at her house, offering support, and even asking for advice on how to handle situations of discrimination and abuse of power. She was initially overwhelmed by the spotlight, but she also realized that this was her chance to use her voice for something bigger. One afternoon, a local community organization invited her to speak at a town hall meeting. The event was meant to address issues of police misconduct and to create a platform for residents to share their experiences and propose solutions. Alana hesitated at first. Public speaking wasn't something she was used to, and the thought of standing in front of a crowd made her anxious. But then she thought of Maya, of the example she wanted to set for her, and the countless people in Grantville who had likely endured similar mistreatment but had stayed silent out of fear. With her decision made, she accepted the invitation. The town hall meeting was packed, with people standing shoulder to shoulder in the small community center. Alana arrived with Maya by her side, feeling a mixture of nerves and determination. As she walked to the front of the room, she saw familiar faces, neighbors, friends, teachers from Maya's school, and even strangers who had come to support her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and began to speak. "I never expected to be standing here today," she started, her voice clear and steady. "I'm a mother, a daughter, a neighbor, just like many of you. And like many of you, I came to Grantville hoping to build a life of peace and respect for myself and my daughter. But what happened to me last weekend made me realize that even in places where we think we're safe, we can be targeted just because of the color of our skin." She paused, letting her words sink in. The audience was silent, every eye on her, captivated by her sincerity and strength. "I don't want to be here as a victim," she continued. "I want to be here as a reminder that no one should have to accept injustice, no matter who it comes from. When that officer approached me, I was afraid, not just for myself, but for my daughter, who was watching everything. I had a choice in that moment, to submit to his bullying or to stand up for myself, to show my daughter that she deserves respect and safety." Maya looked up at her mother with pride, her young face beaming as Alana's words filled the room. "But this isn't just about one officer or one incident," Alana went on, her voice gaining strength. "This is about all the times we've stayed silent, all the times we felt powerless, all the times we've been told that our voices don't matter. I'm here to say that our voices do matter, and together we can bring about change." As she finished, the room erupted into applause. People stood, clapping and cheering, some with tears in their eyes. Alana felt a surge of energy, a realization that her story had resonated deeply with the people of Grantville. She had sparked something within them, a sense of solidarity, a determination to no longer accept injustice quietly. That evening, as they returned home, Alana and Maya found a surprise waiting on their doorstep. A small envelope with a handwritten note. Inside was a message from the Grantville Community Association, thanking Alana for her bravery and informing her that they intended to launch an initiative to address racial biases in the police force. They invited her to join the advisory board, to be a part of shaping policies that would create a safer, more inclusive community. Alana felt a sense of validation, a feeling that her actions had ignited real change. She accepted the invitation, determined to use this platform to make sure no one in Grantville would ever feel powerless again. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The story continued to spread, attracting national attention and inspiring people from other communities to come forward with their own experiences. Letters poured in from people across the country who had faced similar injustices, and they thanked Alana for standing up, for showing them that they, too, could fight back. But amidst the admiration, there were also whispers of criticism. Some people in town felt that Alana was stirring up trouble, making waves where they thought there should be calm. They argued that her actions had put Grantville in a negative spotlight, that she was damaging the town's reputation. Alana heard these criticisms, but refused to let them deter her. She knew that her fight wasn't just for her. It was for Maya, for Miss Lorraine, for every person who had ever been made to feel small. The police department, pressured by the public outcry, launched an investigation into Officer Parker's behavior. It was the first step in a long process, but it was a start. Officer Parker, who had once roamed the streets with unchecked authority, now found himself under scrutiny. The department put him on administrative leave while the investigation was underway, a move that marked a significant shift in accountability within the force. For the first time, people felt hopeful that real change was possible. Alana's courage had set off a chain reaction, one that was reshaping the town's understanding of justice and respect. The community, once divided by fear, was beginning to come together, inspired by her example. As Alana lay in bed that night, exhausted but hopeful, she reflected on the journey she had begun. She had never wanted to be a symbol of resilience, but life had chosen her for this path. And as long as she could, she would continue to stand up, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless. Standing in the spotlight. The town hall meeting had marked a turning point for Alana, but the impact of her actions continued to unfold in unexpected ways. Her speech had resonated far beyond the walls of that small community center, reaching people throughout Grantville and even spilling over into neighboring towns. Alana had become an unwitting symbol of strength and defiance, a role she had never asked for but accepted with a quiet determination. But with this new role came challenges that tested her resilience in ways she hadn't anticipated. News outlets from all over the region had latched onto her story. Alana's encounter with Officer Parker wasn't just a local scandal, it was emblematic of a larger struggle, a story that resonated deeply with communities that had experienced similar injustices. Reporters started showing up at her house, knocking on her door and asking for interviews, wanting to capture her story in every detail. People sent messages of support from all over the country, expressing gratitude and admiration. Alana read each one, feeling a sense of solidarity that helped lift her spirits. But there were also messages of doubt and anger from those who felt she was tarnishing the reputation of law enforcement, questioning her motives and accusing her of seeking fame. Alana knew that standing up for herself and her daughter was the right thing to do. Yet the scrutiny was exhausting. Maya sensed her mother's stress and tried to help by making sure the reporters didn't overwhelm them. Maya would often answer the door first, politely but firmly informing people that her mother needed rest. Alana appreciated Maya's support, though she worried about the toll it was taking on her young daughter. One night, after yet another day filled with phone calls, interviews, and endless questions, Alana and Maya sat together on the couch, flipping through the channels in silence. The news was still covering her story, with pundits discussing her actions and debating the ethics of Officer Parker's behavior. Maya looked up at her mother, her face a mixture of pride and sadness. "Mom," she began hesitantly, "do you ever wish none of this had happened? That we could just go back to how things were before?" Alana considered the question carefully. There were moments, especially at night when the house was quiet and her thoughts grew heavy, that she wished for the simplicity of her old life. But she knew that going back wasn't an option, not anymore. What she had done had changed her, and it had changed Grantville too. "I think about that sometimes, Maya," Alana admitted, reaching over to tuck a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "But I know that what we did was important. There are people who feel safer now because we spoke up. And if standing up for what's right means we have to deal with a bit of discomfort, then I think it's worth it." Maya nodded, seeming to understand. "I'm proud of you, Mom. And I'm glad you didn't let that officer push you around." Alana pulled her daughter into a hug, feeling a wave of gratitude for the strength and support they had found in each other. In the days that followed, Alana's role as a community advocate began to solidify. The Grantville Community Association had asked her to join their advisory board, and she agreed, determined to use her voice to influence positive change. Meetings were scheduled to discuss new policies for the police department, and Alana was invited to help draft proposals that would promote accountability and transparency. She was encouraged to share her insights, and her words carried weight. People listened to her with respect, seeing her not just as a victim, but as a leader. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Alana was approached by a young man named Jordan at a local cafe. He introduced himself as a college student studying social justice, and he explained that her story had inspired him and his friends to get more involved in their community. "Ms. Foster," he said, his eyes earnest, "I just wanted to thank you for what you did. I grew up here, and I've always felt like things would never change, like people in power would just keep doing whatever they wanted. But seeing you stand up to that officer, it made me realize that we don't have to accept things the way they are. We can push for change." Alana smiled, deeply touched. "Thank you, Jordan. That means a lot to me. I didn't set out to inspire anyone, but if my actions can help others find their voice, then it was all worth it." They spoke for a while, with Jordan sharing stories of other instances of discrimination he had witnessed in town. Alana listened, her heart heavy with the knowledge that her experience was not unique. She realized that her story had sparked something in the people around her, a recognition that they were stronger together, that they could hold those in power accountable. As Alana's influence grew, she began receiving invitations to speak at events and conferences. Activist groups, community organizations, and even universities reached out to her, wanting her to share her story. Each invitation was a reminder of how far her voice had traveled, of the impact one person could make. One day, she received a call from an organization that specialized in training women in self-defense and empowerment. They asked if she would consider leading a workshop or sharing her experiences with other women who wanted to learn how to protect themselves, both physically and emotionally. Alana was both excited and nervous at the prospect. Teaching others felt like a natural extension of her journey, yet it was a new challenge, something she had never envisioned for herself. After discussing it with Maya and reflecting on the journey they'd been on together, Alana decided to accept the invitation. She knew that sharing her knowledge could help other women avoid situations like the one she had faced. She began preparing for the workshop, gathering materials and designing exercises that would empower women to stand up for themselves. She wanted them to feel the same sense of strength and self-worth that had carried her through the darkest moments. On the day of the workshop, the room was filled with women of all ages, races, and backgrounds. Some were mothers, others were college students or working professionals, but they all shared one thing in common: a desire to learn, to protect themselves, and to embrace their own power. Alana began with her story, recounting the encounter with Officer Parker and the inner strength that had fueled her decision to fight back. As she spoke, she saw the impact her words had on the women around her, their faces reflecting a mixture of admiration and determination. "Each one of us has a voice," she told them, "and it's our responsibility to use it, not just for ourselves, but for others who may not have the courage or the opportunity to speak up. We can't control how others treat us, but we can control how we respond. We can stand up for our dignity, and we can show the world that we won't be pushed down." The workshop was a success, and many of the women thanked her afterward, expressing their gratitude for her courage and her guidance. Alana felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in years, knowing that she was helping others find the same strength she had discovered within herself. But as Alana continued to grow in prominence, she began to attract unwanted attention from some who saw her as a threat. Not everyone in Grantville was pleased with the changes she was advocating for. Anonymous letters began arriving at her home, filled with hateful words and veiled threats. Some people accused her of stirring up trouble, of creating division within the town. Others warned her to know her place and stop challenging the status quo. Alana was shaken but refused to be intimidated. She knew that standing up for justice came with risks, and she was prepared to face them. She took precautions, notifying the community association and the police department about the letters, and they assured her that they would investigate. But she also knew that fear was a tool used to silence people, to keep them from pushing back against injustice. When Maya found one of the letters in the mail and asked about it, Alana was honest with her daughter. "Sometimes, when you stand up for what's right, People who don't want things to change will try to scare you, she explained gently. But remember, Maya, courage isn't about not feeling afraid. It's about choosing to keep going, even when you're scared. Maya listened, her eyes filled with a newfound respect for her mother. "I'm not scared, Mom," she said, her voice steady. "I know you're strong, and I'll be strong too." Their bond deepened through the shared challenges, and Alana realized that she was teaching her daughter a lesson far more valuable than anything she could have learned in school. She was showing Maya that strength came from within, that it was possible to face adversity with grace and resilience. Meanwhile, the investigation into Officer Parker was underway, and the pressure was mounting on the police department to address his behavior. The community's demand for accountability could no longer be ignored, and stories of others who had been mistreated by Parker began to surface. People felt emboldened by Alana's example, and they came forward with their own experiences, painting a picture of a man who had abused his power for far too long. The police department's internal affairs unit took the allegations seriously, launching a comprehensive review of Officer Parker's conduct. The evidence was mounting, and it became clear that he had not only targeted Alana, but had a history of discriminatory behavior. The department faced public scrutiny, and the leadership knew they had no choice but to act. After weeks of investigation, Officer Parker was suspended pending a disciplinary hearing. The news spread quickly, and the community felt a collective sense of relief and validation. Alana had become a catalyst for change, her courage setting off a chain of events that had brought justice to those who had suffered in silence for years. That night, as Alana and Maya sat together, they looked back on the journey they had traveled. What had begun as a painful, unjust experience had transformed into something powerful, something that had changed the lives of everyone in Grantville. And Alana knew that this was just the beginning of their story, a story that would continue to inspire others to stand up, to speak out, and to never accept anything less than the respect and dignity they deserved. Rising above the shadows. In the weeks following Officer Parker's suspension, Alana's life had changed in ways she never could have anticipated. What had started as a single act of self-defense against injustice had spiraled into something much larger, something that demanded her full attention and resilience. Grantville was a different place now. The town that once held unspoken rules and hidden prejudices was now openly examining its own flaws, thanks in no small part to Alana's bravery. Yet, with this change came a new wave of resistance. Those who had long benefited from the silence and compliance of others felt threatened by the scrutiny now focused on the town's law enforcement practices. The anonymous hate letters continued to arrive, sometimes containing thinly veiled threats, other times filled with bitter accusations of her being a troublemaker. Alana read them all, feeling each word like a sting, but she was determined not to let fear rule her life. She had come too far to back down. Despite the whispers and the threats, she continued her work with the Grantville Community Association. Every meeting, every conversation, seemed to chip away at the ingrained fear that had held the community back. People were opening up, sharing their stories and standing in solidarity with each other. Alana was humbled and inspired by the courage she witnessed in others, especially from those who had never spoken up before. One evening, Alana was invited to attend a community panel organized by the association. The panel was designed to bring together local leaders, residents, and law enforcement representatives to discuss issues of racial bias, police accountability, and the path toward healing. Alana had been asked to speak as one of the key figures driving the conversation, and though she felt a knot of anxiety at the thought of facing yet another crowd, she knew she couldn't refuse. This was an opportunity to address the issues head-on, to confront not only Officer Parker's actions, but also the systems that allowed such behavior to persist. As she prepared for the panel, she thought back to the lessons life had taught her, particularly in recent months. She remembered her parents' teachings about resilience, about the importance of standing up for oneself while also showing kindness to others. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, a reminder that strength wasn't just about fighting. It was about knowing when to forgive, when to rise above. On the day of the panel, the community center was packed. The air was thick with anticipation, a mixture of tension and hope. People from all walks of life had gathered. Families, students, elders, young professionals, all eager to listen, to learn, to participate in a conversation that had been long overdue. Alana felt a swell of pride at the sight. This was Grantville, her home, finally coming together to address its wounds. She took a deep breath as she walked up to the stage. Her heart pounded, but she kept her head high, feeling Maya's reassuring presence in the front row. Her daughter's eyes shone with pride and encouragement, grounding her in the moment. As Alana took her place on the panel, the moderator, a respected local pastor, introduced each speaker and invited them to share their thoughts on the issues facing the town. When it was her turn, Alana leaned into the microphone, her voice steady, but carrying a weight of emotion. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, glancing out at the audience. "I never imagined that I would be in this position, speaking to my community about issues that have impacted my life and the lives of so many others. But I believe that sometimes life has a way of putting us exactly where we need to be." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "When I stood up to Officer Parker, I didn't do it because I wanted attention or because I wanted to make a statement. I did it because I had no choice. I did it for my daughter, for myself, and for everyone who has ever felt powerless in the face of authority." The room was silent, everyone hanging on her words. Alana could see nods of understanding, faces reflecting pain, empathy, and determination. "But this isn't just about one officer or one incident," she continued. "This is about the culture we've allowed to grow unchecked. A culture that tells people like me that we don't belong, that we don't deserve respect. It's about the systems that allow people in power to abuse that power without fear of consequence." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, bolstered by the silent encouragement of the crowd. "It's time for us to change that culture. It's time to hold our institutions accountable. We deserve a town where our children can grow up feeling safe, respected, and valued, no matter who they are or what they look like." The audience erupted into applause, and Alana felt a surge of emotion. She had spoken her truth, and the town had listened. After the panel, Alana was approached by countless people who wanted to thank her, to share their own experiences, to offer their support. She felt overwhelmed but grateful, realizing that her story had given others the courage to stand up as well. Among the crowd was an unexpected figure, Chief Howard, the head of the Grantville Police Department. Chief Howard was an older man, well respected in the community, but his reputation had been shaken by the controversy surrounding Officer Parker. He extended a hand to Alana, his face a mixture of contrition and respect. "Ms. Foster," he began, his voice low, "I want to thank you for what you did today. You've shown this town a strength that many of us didn't know existed. I'm truly sorry for the way things unfolded. Officer Parker's behavior is not representative of what we stand for." Alana looked at him, her expression thoughtful. She appreciated his words, but she knew that an apology alone wasn't enough. "Thank you, Chief Howard," she replied. "But words aren't going to fix what's broken. We need actions, real changes, if we're going to rebuild trust in this community." He nodded, clearly humbled. "I understand that. We're already making changes, reviewing our policies, and I want you to be involved in that process. If you're willing, I would like to invite you to participate in our advisory committee on police reform. Your voice would be invaluable." Alana was taken aback. She hadn't expected this invitation, but she recognized the significance of the opportunity. By participating, she could help shape the very system that had failed her. She could make sure that no one else in Grantville would have to endure what she had. "I appreciate that, Chief Howard," she said after a moment of contemplation. "I would be honored to help." As Alana stepped into her new role on the advisory committee, she found herself juggling multiple responsibilities: advocate, mother, leader. Her life had become a whirlwind of meetings, community events, and policy discussions. She was constantly reading up on police reform, educating herself so that she could contribute effectively. The more she learned, the more determined she became to see real, lasting change. Yet, even as she poured her energy into her new role, the resistance continued. Some people in town still saw her as a threat, someone who was stirring up trouble. The anonymous letters didn't stop, and one day, Alana received a particularly chilling message. The letter warned her to stay in her lane and threatened harm if she didn't back down. For a moment, fear crept into her heart. The threats were becoming more personal, more direct, and she worried not just for herself, but for Maya. But as she sat down with the letter in her hands, she reminded herself of everything she had already overcome. She thought of the people who depended on her, who had found courage in her actions. She couldn't let fear dictate her choices. That night, Alana sat down with Maya to talk about the threats. She didn't want to hide the reality from her daughter, but she also didn't want her to be afraid. "Maya," she began, her voice calm, "some people don't like the changes we're trying to make. They're afraid of losing their power, so they're trying to scare us." Maya looked up at her mother, her expression serious. "Are we in danger, Mom?" Alana took her daughter's hands, holding them tightly. "I don't know, sweetheart. But what I do know is that we're doing something important, something that could help a lot of people. And we're not alone. The community is with us, and we have people who are watching out for us." Maya nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of trust and determination. "I believe in you, Mom, and I want you to keep going. I'll be brave too." Alana felt a swell of pride and love for her daughter. In that moment, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The weeks turned into months, and slowly but surely, Alana's efforts began to bear fruit. The police department implemented new training programs focused on racial sensitivity and de-escalation. Community liaisons were appointed to bridge the gap between law enforcement and residents, fostering open communication and mutual understanding. Alana's voice was no longer just a single voice in the crowd. It had become a guiding force for change. One day, as Alana walked through the town square, she noticed a mural being painted on one of the walls. It was a tribute to the community's resilience, a vibrant depiction of diverse faces standing side by side, their expressions filled with strength and hope. At the center of the mural was a figure unmistakably modeled after Alana, standing tall with her arm around Maya, both of them looking toward a bright, hopeful future. Alana stood there, tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by the realization of what her journey had meant to the people of Grantville. She had become a symbol of courage, not because she had sought it, but because she had refused to remain silent. As she looked at the mural, she felt a deep sense of peace. She knew that the road ahead would still have its challenges, but she also knew that she was no longer walking it alone. The people of Grantville were with her, and together, they were building a town where justice and respect could flourish, testing the limits of resolve. Months had passed since Alana's journey to justice had begun, and though the support of the community had brought her hope and a sense of purpose, the pressure continued to mount. As Grantville moved forward with its police reforms, Alana found herself caught in a tug-of-war between the community's growing demand for accountability and those who were resistant to change. The town was divided, and Alana was in the middle of a storm. The advisory committee meetings had become more intense as they tackled deeper issues. Discussions on racial profiling, use of force, and community policing brought forth stories and experiences from people who had suffered in silence for years. Alana was committed to listening and learning, ensuring that every voice was heard. But with every meeting, she encountered resistance from certain committee members who clung to the belief that the police force was beyond reproach. They dismissed complaints as exaggerations, citing the safety of the town as the ultimate priority. It was frustrating and exhausting work, and Alana often left these meetings feeling drained. Then came a particularly trying day. Alana sat in a committee meeting, flanked by community leaders, local officials, and law enforcement representatives. The subject of the day was the proposed Independent Oversight Board. a body that would review incidents of police misconduct and hold officers accountable. Alana knew this board was essential to rebuilding trust, but the proposal had sparked heated debate. This oversight board is an unnecessary intrusion, argued Officer Riley, one of the most vocal opponents on the committee. He was an older officer with decades on the force and a staunch defender of traditional law enforcement practices. "We've always handled things internally, and we've done just fine. Adding another layer of bureaucracy only undermines our authority." Alana took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Officer Riley, with all due respect, the community has lost faith in the system of internal investigations. We need an oversight board that can review cases independently to ensure transparency and accountability. This isn't about undermining authority, it's about rebuilding trust." Riley scoffed. "Trust? This is about pandering to public outcry. We're the ones putting our lives on the line every day. Do you really think civilians are equipped to understand the decisions we have to make in the heat of the moment?" Alana felt the frustration rising within her, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, officers face difficult situations, and that's exactly why we need independent oversight. When people feel that there's no recourse for misconduct, it breeds resentment and fear. We're not asking for perfection. We're asking for accountability. People want to know that there's a system in place that treats everyone fairly." The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. She could see that some members of the committee were nodding in agreement, but others, like Officer Riley, were clearly agitated. Alana knew she was walking a fine line, challenging a deeply ingrained culture, but she also knew she couldn't back down. After the meeting, Alana felt emotionally drained. She stayed behind, gathering her things slowly, trying to regain her composure. Just as she was about to leave, Chief Howard approached her. His face was lined with fatigue, but his eyes held a look of quiet respect. "Ms. Foster, can I speak with you for a moment?" he asked, his tone gentle. "Of course, Chief Howard," she replied, though she could feel her energy waning. He gestured for her to sit back down, and he joined her at the table. For a moment, he simply looked at her, as if weighing his words. "I want you to know that I respect what you're doing here, Alana," he said, using her first name for the first time since they'd met. "I know it's not easy, and I know you're up against a lot of resistance. Change is hard, especially in a place like this. But you've shown more courage and resilience than most people I've ever met." Alana nodded, appreciating his words but still feeling the weight of her role. "Thank you, Chief Howard. But sometimes I feel like I'm not making any progress. The resistance is strong, and it's exhausting." He gave her a sympathetic smile. "Progress isn't always visible right away, but I can assure you, people are listening. You're making a difference, even if it doesn't feel like it now. And as uncomfortable as it may be, these conversations are the first step toward real change." They spoke for a while longer, discussing the future of the reforms and the challenges that lay ahead. As Alana left the meeting room that day, she felt a renewed sense of determination. Chief Howard's support was invaluable, but she knew that she couldn't rely solely on encouragement. She had to keep pushing, no matter how difficult the path became. That evening, Alana returned home to Maya, who was waiting eagerly to tell her about her day at school. Over dinner, Maya chattered on about her friends, her teachers, and a new art project she was working on. Alana listened, grateful for the moments of normalcy amidst the chaos of her life. "Mom," Maya said suddenly, her tone serious, "are you scared?" Alana looked at her daughter, surprised by the question. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Maya hesitated, fidgeting with her fork. "I mean, are you scared of what might happen because you're doing all this? Some kids at school were talking about it. They said that some people don't like you because of what happened with the police." Alana reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. "Yes, Maya, sometimes I am scared, but I'm also proud. I'm proud of what we're doing, of the difference we're making. And I'm not alone. We have people supporting us, people who believe in this just as much as we do." Maya nodded, a look of understanding in her young eyes. "I'm proud of you too, Mom. You're the bravest person I know." Alana smiled, her heart swelling with love. "Thank you, Maya. That means everything to me." As the days passed, the town continued to feel the effects of Alana's advocacy. More residents began to attend the community meetings, sharing their own experiences and voicing their concerns. Alana had become something of a mentor to some of the younger activists, guiding them and encouraging them to speak up. She could see a new generation rising up, determined to create a fairer, more just society. However, the opposition was also growing louder. Some members of the community, especially those with ties to the police force, began to organize their own gatherings, speaking out against what they saw as an attack on law enforcement. They accused Alana and her supporters of trying to weaken the police and destabilize the town. It was disheartening, but Alana knew that resistance was inevitable when challenging deep-seated norms. One afternoon, as she was walking home from a committee meeting, she noticed a small group of protesters outside her house. They held signs that read, "Support our police," and "Stop dividing our community." Alana's heart sank. These were her neighbors, people she had once exchanged pleasantries with, now standing on her lawn, accusing her of tearing the town apart. Maya, who had been watching from the window, ran to her mother's side. "Mom, why are they here? Why are they mad at us?" Alana wrapped an arm around her daughter, her face calm though her heart ached. "They're afraid, Maya. Change is scary. And sometimes people get angry when they feel like things are being taken away from them. But we're not doing anything wrong. We're just trying to make things better." The protesters didn't stay long, but the incident left a mark. That evening, Alana sat alone in her living room, grappling with the weight of it all. She knew that what she was doing was right, but the loneliness of the fight was becoming harder to bear. The following day, Alana received a call from her attorney, Martin Harlow, who had been helping her navigate the legal complexities of her case against Officer Parker. He sounded upbeat, more hopeful than she'd heard him in weeks. "Alana," Martin began, "I have some good news. The town council has reviewed the case, and they've decided to move forward with disciplinary action against Officer Parker. He's going to face a formal hearing, and there's a strong possibility that he'll be permanently removed from the force." A wave of relief washed over Alana. This was a huge victory, not just for her, but for the entire community. The fight hadn't been in vain. That's amazing news, Martin," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for everything you've done." "It's my pleasure, Alana. You've been incredibly brave through all of this. You've inspired a lot of people, and this decision is a direct result of your courage." As she hung up the phone, Alana felt a mixture of joy and exhaustion. This victory was a milestone, a testament to her resilience and the power of the community that had rallied around her. But she knew that the journey wasn't over. Officer Parker's hearing would be public, and the town would be watching closely. This would be a defining moment for Grantville. In the days leading up to the hearing, Alana continued her work with the advisory committee, finalizing the details for the independent oversight board and helping to shape new policies that would prevent future abuses of power. Her reputation had grown, and people looked to her as a leader, a role model. But she remained humble, reminding herself that she was just one person, part of a larger movement. On the morning of the hearing, Alana stood outside the courthouse, surrounded by supporters, reporters, and onlookers. Maya was by her side, holding her mother's hand tightly, her eyes wide with both fear and pride. The atmosphere was tense, charged with anticipation. Alana took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. As she walked through the courthouse doors, she knew that this moment would be remembered, not just by her but by everyone who had fought for justice alongside her. Whatever the outcome, she had shown Grantville, and herself, that one voice could indeed make a difference. Inside, as the hearing began, Alana felt a surge of strength. This was her story, her fight, and she was ready to see it through to the end. A legacy of change. The day of Officer Parker's disciplinary hearing had arrived, and the town of Grantville was on edge. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, a sea of faces filled with a mixture of anticipation, hope, and trepidation. Some were there to support Alana, while others came to stand with the police, believing that Alana's actions had brought unnecessary scrutiny to the force. Yet everyone knew this moment marked a turning point, a day when Grantville would have to confront its own values and decide what kind of community it wanted to be. Alana walked through the courthouse doors, flanked by her attorney, Martin Harlow, and her daughter, Maya, who had insisted on accompanying her. Alana was filled with a sense of purpose as she looked around the crowded room. Reporters, local activists, police officers, and everyday citizens filled the seats, waiting for the hearing to begin. Alana could feel the weight of their gazes, the pressure of their expectations. She took a deep breath, reminded herself of why she was here, and squeezed Maya's hand for strength. "Mom, are you nervous?" Maya asked, her eyes wide with both pride and worry. Alana smiled, brushing a hand over her daughter's shoulder. "A little, honey, but I'm also ready. This is important. For us, for everyone here. We have to stand up for what's right." Maya nodded, her young face set with determination. "I believe in you, Mom. We all do." As they took their seats, Alana's mind drifted to the journey that had brought her here. The months of protests, town hall meetings, and late-night discussions with community members who shared her vision of a better Grantville. She thought of the support she had received from people she never would have expected, and the relentless resistance from those who saw her as a threat to the status quo. Every step of the way, she had been tested, but she had emerged stronger, more determined, and more aware of her own strength. The judge entered the room, calling the hearing to order, and the air grew tense. Officer Parker sat across the room, his face tight with barely concealed anger. Alana could feel his resentment, his disbelief that his actions had led him to this place. She knew he viewed her as an enemy, but she reminded herself that this wasn't about personal revenge. This was about accountability, about ensuring that no one else would have to face what she had endured. The prosecution presented a series of video recordings, each one capturing Officer Parker's confrontations with citizens, including the infamous footage of his encounter with Alana. The room watched in silence as the scenes unfolded on the screen. Each moment was a stark reminder of the unchecked power that had allowed Officer Parker to act with impunity and the abuse that had gone unchallenged for so long. Alana looked around, noting the reactions of the crowd. Faces were set in grim determination. Some people shook their heads, horrified by what they saw. She could see the shifting expressions of the officers present. Some looked uncomfortable, while others wore expressions of stoic indifference. But there was no denying the truth playing out before them, a truth that was now too visible to ignore. When it was her turn to testify, Alana walked to the witness stand, her heart pounding, but her face calm. She met the eyes of the judge, the attorneys, and finally, Officer Parker, who stared at her with a mix of defiance and disbelief. "Ms. Foster," the prosecuting attorney began, "can you tell us, in your own words, what happened the day of your encounter with Officer Parker?" Alana took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. "I had just finished grocery shopping with my daughter, Maya. We were loading our groceries into the car when Officer Parker approached us. He demanded to see my ID, accusing me of looking suspicious. I explained that I was just shopping, that I hadn't done anything wrong, but he didn't care. He grabbed my arm, hurting me, and when I asked him to let go, he only tightened his grip. I tried to stay calm, but he was relentless." Her voice faltered slightly, but she steadied herself. "He pushed me against the car, accused me of resisting when I wasn't. I knew then that I had to defend myself, not just for me but for my daughter, who was watching everything. So I broke free. I did what I had to do." The courtroom was silent, her words hanging in the air. Alana felt a rush of emotion as she looked over at Maya, who was watching her mother with tears in her eyes. She knew that her daughter would remember this moment forever, that she was showing her the importance of standing up for oneself, no matter the consequences. The defense attempted to paint Officer Parker as a dedicated officer who had merely overreacted in a tense situation, but the evidence was overwhelming. The video footage, combined with Alana's testimony and the testimonies of others who had witnessed his behavior, painted a clear picture of a man who had abused his power for far too long. When the judge called for a recess, Alana returned to her seat, feeling the weight of her testimony. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, but she knew she had done the right thing. She had told her story, and now it was up to the court to decide what would happen next. The deliberations took hours, and Alana waited anxiously, surrounded by supporters who offered her words of encouragement. Maya sat beside her, holding her mother's hand, her small face a mixture of pride and worry. As the hours stretched on, Alana felt her resolve waver, but she reminded herself of the importance of this moment. She had come too far to give up now. Finally, the judge returned to the courtroom, and the room fell silent. Everyone held their breath as the judge read the verdict. Officer Parker was found guilty of misconduct, and he was stripped of his position on the force. The judge spoke firmly, addressing both the defendant and the entire courtroom. Today's verdict is a reminder that no one is above the law. Officer Parker's actions were a breach of the trust placed in him by this community, and he has been held accountable. This decision is not only a victory for Ms. Foster, but for every citizen of Grantville who deserves to feel safe and respected. The courtroom erupted in applause, a wave of relief and triumph washing over the crowd. Alana felt tears well up in her eyes as she hugged Maya, who was beaming with pride. People around her offered congratulations, thanking her for her bravery and her determination. In that moment, Alana felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Justice had been served, and she knew that this victory belonged not just to her, but to everyone who had stood by her side. The aftermath of the hearing was transformative for Grantville. Alana's victory sent a powerful message, one that rippled through the town and beyond. The police department implemented new training programs focused on racial sensitivity and de-escalation techniques. The Independent Oversight Board was officially established, and community leaders worked closely with law enforcement to foster an environment of transparency and mutual respect. Alana continued her work with the advisory committee, but she also began to focus on other areas where she could make a difference. She partnered with local organizations to create mentorship programs for young people, offering them a safe space to discuss issues of race, identity, and resilience. She taught self-defense classes, empowering women and girls to protect themselves and stand up for their rights. Her life had taken a new direction, one that was rooted in the principles of justice, compassion, and community. One evening, Alana and Maya attended the unveiling of the mural in the town square. The mural, which had been painted by local artists, depicted scenes from Grantville's journey toward justice. At the center was an image of Alana standing tall, her hand resting on Maya's shoulder as they looked out over the town. Surrounding them were figures representing the diverse faces of the community, young and old, people of all backgrounds, standing together in solidarity. As Alana looked at the mural, she felt a deep sense of peace. She knew that her story would live on, not just as a memory, but as a symbol of courage and resilience. She had transformed her pain into something beautiful, something that would inspire generations to come. Maya squeezed her mother's hand, looking up at her with awe. "Mom, you're a hero," she whispered, her voice filled with admiration. Alana smiled, wrapping her arm around her daughter. "I'm just a mom who wanted to make things right. And now, it's up to all of us to keep this going." In the months that followed, Alana's story continued to spread. She was invited to speak at conferences, to share her experiences with audiences far and wide. People reached out to her, thanking her for her bravery and telling her how her story had inspired them to stand up for their own rights. Alana embraced this new chapter of her life, using her platform to advocate for justice, equality, and compassion. And though the journey had been long and difficult, Alana knew that it had been worth every struggle. She had stood up to injustice, had fought for her dignity, and had shown her daughter, and the world, that one person could indeed make a difference. Her legacy was one of resilience and hope, a testament to the power of the single voice raised against the darkness. As Alana and Maya walked through Grantville that evening, the town bathed in the golden light of sunset, Alana felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had faced her fears, challenged the status quo, and helped to build a community where respect and justice could thrive. Her story was no longer just her own. It belonged to Grantville, to Maya, and to everyone who dared to believe in the possibility of change. And as they walked together, hand in hand, Alana knew that their journey was far from over. They had become part of something greater, a movement, a legacy, a beacon of hope for all who would follow.